Namaste and a very good morning to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Linda Yanti Sulistiawati ma'am, Associate Professor of Law, Gadjah Mada University, Indonesia, Dr. Payal Mehta ma'am, Organizing Secretary, International Conference and Assistant Professor, Faculty of Law, GLS University, all the participants and the viewers who have joined us on the live streaming of the plenary session 3 of the virtual international conference on climate change governance and law, titled Climate Justice and Human Rights Impacts and Vulnerability. Ma'am, I warmly welcome you on the official e-platform of Faculty of Law, GLS University. Namaste, ma'am. Now, without wasting much time, I request Dr. Payal Mehta ma'am for her welcome address. Ma'am, over to you for your welcome address.
Thank you, Hiral ma'am. Very good morning once again to all the viewers who are watching us. Very warm welcome on the e-platform of Faculty of Law, GLS University. On behalf of Faculty of Law, GLS University, once again, we welcome you, Linda Yanti Sulistiawati ma'am, who is very kind enough to give time and spare her valuable insight with us today in the plenary session. As it is already said, it is climate justice and human rights impacts and vulnerability. We are very glad, ma'am, that you are present today with us. Yesterday, we had our inaugural ceremony in which Brian Preston, sir, Chief Justice at Australia, he gave the inaugural address and he was the keynote speaker in that. First plenary session was conducted by Barbara Pozzo ma'am, and second plenary session was conducted by Gitanjali Gill ma'am, and today it will start with you. So we are so glad that you will be giving us your insight on the subjects, that is uh, climate justice and human rights impacts and vulnerability. Once again, welcome to all the viewers, presenters, paper presenters, research scholars, advocates, NGO, people from different places who have joined virtually on the platform of Faculty of Law, GLS University with us. Warm welcome. Thank you once again.
Thank you
Over to
so
you,
much,
Hiral.
ma'am, for your warm welcome. Now, I would like to request Dr. Farum Pandya, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Law, GLS University, for her opening remarks for the session. Farum ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Hiral ma'am. So, climate justice and human rights, impact and vulnerability. Human rights are legal guarantees that protect individuals, group, and people against actions and omissions that interfere with fundamental freedoms and entitlements. Human rights law mandates the governments and duty bearers to respect, promote, protect, and fulfill all human rights of the people at large. They are equal, indivisible, interrelated, and interdependent and cannot be waived or taken away. Furthermore, human rights are legally protected and impose obligations in relation to actions and omissions, particularly of states and state actors. It is now beyond dispute that climate change caused by human activity has negative impacts on the full enjoyment of human rights. Climate change has profound impacts on a variety of human rights, including right to life, self determination, development, food, health, water, sanitation, and housing. The human rights framework also require that global efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change should be guided by relevant human rights norms and principles, including the rights to participation, information, transparency, accountability, and non discrimination. Simply put, climate change is a human right problem, and human rights framework must be a part of the solution. It would also be pertinent for me to mention today that as we talk about climate change and human rights, the resolution that was passed by the president of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Abdullah Shahid, it has recognized for the first time that everyone, everywhere, has a human right to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Thank you so much, ma'am. Over to you, Hero, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Forum ma'am. Now I take this opportunity to formally introduce the guest speaker of the plenary session 3, Dr. Linda Yanti Sulistiawati ma'am, Associate Professor of Law, Gadjah Mada University, Indonesia. Dr. Linda is a Senior Research Fellow at APCEL and also an Associate Professor of Law in University Gadjah Mada. Ma'am is an internationally recognized scholar in Indonesian international environmental law, and her research has established her as a leading expert who is frequently consulted by the Indonesian government and international organizations. Ma'am's research focuses on international environmental issues such as climate change, land issues, and customary issues. Ma'am was a member of the delegation leading Indonesia's negotiations of the Paris Agreement on climate change. From 2018 to 21, Ma'am was a lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's sixth assessment report. Ma'am was a visiting fellow at APCEL from 2019 to September 2019 under the APCEL Visiting Fellow Program. Ma'am, the participants and the august audience are awaiting to hear from the vast ocean from your knowledge and experience. We are all ears. Over to you, ma'am.
Ma'am, you are mute.
Thank you. Yeah,
Kindly
can you
unmute
hear
it.
me now?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for GLS to have invited me for this very high spirited and important event, I suppose. And for all the participants and also viewer on YouTube, happy Sunday. I don't actually work on a Sunday, but since the topic offered was very dear, like is still very dear to my heart, so I think this is a good time to sort of discuss these very important issues between climate change, climate justice, and also human rights. So, would you kindly share my screen, please, Dr. Payal? Okay. Uh, hmm. This looks a little different. Okay. So, my name is Linda Yanti Sulistiawati. I'm originally from Indonesia. I teach in Gadjah Mada University, Faculty of Law. I teach international law, international environmental law, and a bunch of other classes in the Faculty of Law and also in the graduate programs of Gadjah Mada University. But currently, I am based in National University of Singapore in Singapore as a senior research fellow in Asia Pacific Center for Environmental Law at the University of National University of Singapore. So, when we are talking about climate change, most of us who goes through law school, we're not essentially scientists. So we need to sort of understand what climate change is and how it became how it became our responsibility as human. um, why are we asking our leaders to do this and that and all kinds of things that we're supposed to save our planet, right? So since the industrial revolution, the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide has increased almost 50%. So that's very big in terms of numbers. And if you can see on your screen there, the picture that we had, this is like 70 years ago of an icy lake. This is somewhere in Greenland, right? It has became very watery because of the high temperature that we're experiencing lately. And scientists suggest that all of this, the increase in the atmospheric
temperature, the increase in the number of CO2 in the atmosphere is due to human activity. So, among others, burning fossil fuels and coals, including coals, oil and gas, and things that are extracted from the bowel of the earth, and then burn them and put them in the atmosphere, in the air. So most of it is our doing, right? So when we are talking about climate change, we have a shift in the average weather condition, including measures such as temperature, humidity, rainfall, cloudiness, and wind patterns, and changes in the frequency or severity in these conditions. So climate change do not happen overnight or within a few years, right? So you can only say we are experiencing climate change when we have very good measurements of data going back at least 50 years from where we are now. So we can compare all of these things, the temperatures, humidity, rainfalls, etc., etc., etc. That's like in the scientific point of view. But when we go to a village, for example, to do a research, and then we go ask a farmer or a fisherman whether they are experiencing climate change, maybe you will get a negative response because they wouldn't know what the phrase climate change is. But if we ask them whether, for example, they have longer drought or very hot drought and very short but intense rainfall, I'm pretty sure they will tell you even in more detail than the scientists, right? So, um, as time goes and we're experiencing climate change, so the people who are facing it firsthand are the people who are living on the land, who have their livelihood directly depending on the land, right? Like we're talking about farmers, we're talking about fishermen. They have to fish further, they have to fish longer, they have to uh, encounter more typhoons, right? And then of course, the one who suffer most is the poorest of the poor, almost the poorest of the poor. Okay, so this is the IPCC report from the newest assessment report 6. I'm one of the lead author in assessment report 6 of IPCC in the mitigation working group. So as you can see in your graph there on the screen, since 1990 to 2019, you can see the number of global net anthropogenic emission have continued to rise across all the major groups of greenhouse gases, right? This is from 1990 up until 2019. And if you don't know what greenhouse gases is, these are what they are. Fluorinated gases, nitrous oxides, methane, CO2 from land use change, and forestry, or what we call it in the climate change lingo is LULUCF, land use change, and forestry, and then also CO2 from fossil fuel and industry. Okay. So how the international community is dealing with climate change, specifically how are we regulating it, right? So it started in 1972 with Stockholm in the UN conference on the human environment. We already talked about how um, all human are, they have to have like good living condition, they have to have a sustainable way of living, which came for a circle, full circle actually, last month in July 28th. The United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution that says, it's human right to have a good environment to live into, healthy and good environmental to live. And then you can see like all of this other instruments that comes after Stockholm, um, which culminated in the I think 2015 Paris Agreement and 2030 Agenda 21 of SDGs, right? So we're currently here. I should probably have another number here for the UNGA resolution adoption, right, on human rights. But that's pretty much, the continuum that we have gone through as international communities, agreeing in all these instruments and these agreements in relation to climate change. So, what about climate justice, right? We have discussed earlier that like the most people who suffer from climate change impacts are the poorest of the poor. Um, you can see here on your screen that as the running definition that climate justice is a term and a movement which acknowledges climate change can have differing social, economic, public health, and other adverse impact on underprivileged population, right? So the key factors are recognizing the key groups differently affected, climate change exacerbate inequitable social conditions, and of course, what we are trying to establish and have already discussed a lot, and the UNGA just adopted is the human rights and climate change impact nexus, right? How they connect to one another. So, the issue of human rights and climate change linkages was first taken up in 2008 by the UN Human Rights Council, but since then it has rapidly gained ground with UN human rights bodies, among other issuing comments, recommendations, and even joint statements on the impacts of climate change on the enjoyment of human rights, right? You see it in the CEDAW, Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and also the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights are also saying that, and now the UN General Assembly already adopted it as part of human rights to have adequate living condition, right? Healthy environmental condition. So by itself, it's climate justice is a multi-dimensional inequality. Islam and Winkler, in their piece in 2017, say that the first inequality in the multi-dimensional uh, stigma of climate justice is that inequality based on demographic characteristic such as gender, race, ethnicity, religion, and age. And then the second type of climate justice is inequality on the assets and income. So the poorer you are, the harder you get hit, right? So inequality, the third inequality is on the public decision making or political power and access to public resources such as public health, education, housing, and other services. So this is also from Islam and Winkler, that the multidimensional equality and then form like a vicious circle on how the less powerful you are, the less income you have, the less education you have, you are more more susceptible to increased exposure and less coping ability of disadvantaged group towards climate impacts. Yeah. So the first inequality is economic inequality, which hampers the achievement of right to development and further diminishes the ability of marginalized sector and communities to participate fully and effectively in development processes. In economic inequality in many developing countries continue to be a major problem as developing country governments continue to seek ways to spread the benefit of growth to their people. However, structural deficiencies, including in relation to international domestic trade linkages, infrastructure gaps, finance gaps, etc., continue to make it difficult for people in developing country to combat economic inequality rapidly, right? Including corruption and collusion and nepotism, right? To address economic inequality and achieve the right to development, rapid increase in income and more equitable income distribution needs to be undertaken by addressing systemic gaps and barriers. So, human rights based approaches for economic equality at the country level is a guarantee of income, which is very hard for developing countries, revitalize and enhance public services, UBI, that's like, a lot of people are discussing UBI, whether universal basic income, whether it is, achievable or not. Um, which is very hard for, again, developing countries or poorer countries or even SIDS and war zone countries. Employment guarantee schemes, gender equality interventions, and the rights and economic justice for indigenous people, and the program for persons living with disabilities. For in the countries, intra countries, we have adequate and principled helps from outside the country, right? Development assistance, and then sustainable debt management, sustainable trade, climate finance for developing countries, climate actions, etc. So this is also not easy. So in the UN, they have also revamped their 8 goals of Millennium Development Goals into the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. So from 8 to 17, from 18 target to 169 target, from 67 indicators to 241 indicators. So more detailed, right? Um, SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, is also talking about inequality, specifically Goal 5 on gender equality, Goal 10 on reducing inequalities within and among countries, right? In all of very important agreement and instruments, specifically on human rights, we can find traces and highlights, specifically highlights lah ya, on climate impacts and how climate impacts is impairing the enjoyment of human rights, including the right to development, right? And then goal 13, when you are looking at SDG, is specific on climate change. Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. You have the rising temperature, you have the rising and warming seas, and this urgent action to combat climate change and minimize its disruption is integral to the successful implementation of the SDGs. So, inequality and climate change vicious circle. You can see that coming from climate hazards, and then it hits disproportionate loss of assets and income suffered by disadvantaged groups. And then we're faced with multidimensional inequality and greater exposure to vulnerability and disadvantaged groups to climate hazards, right? Again, this is from Climate and Social Inequality by Islam and Winkler. Okay, this is pretty much almost the same. And then this is, I would like to show to you, this is from the SPM, the Summary for Policymaker, that the IPCC released a few months ago, that projected global GHG emission from our NDCs prior to COP26 in Glasgow last year would make it likely that warming will exceed 1.5, which is not a new news, but it's there, and make it harder after 2030 to limit warming below 2 degrees. So this is the current policies. The current policy that we saw, and we assess within the IPCC. If we don't make the transition of policy by 2030, if we manage to make it, and then we'll have this projection of graph that the temperature can be lowered almost, almost intact more easily after 2030. But if we don't get it right by 2030, and then it will be hard for us to lower our temperature goal and reach our temperature goal. So you see in the red here. Okay, so another instrument that I think is touching upon a lot of human rights issue within climate change is the Paris Agreement, specifically its preambular recital on the human rights. It's talking about the right to life, the right to health, the right to development, the right for an adequate standard of living, the right to food, the right to housing, the right to self determination, specifically for Indigenous people, and the right to healthy environment. So, and then what? And then, like, why do we need to prove that climate change impact and climate justice is part of human rights, right? As intersections between climate impacts and human rights becomes increasingly clear, this would be easy for litigants to use human rights arguments with a growing receptivity among courts towards such arguments in climate cases, right? So Peel and Osofsky said it in 2018, Safaresi and said it in 2019, Maki and Van Zeben in 2021. So all of them are agreeing the relationship, the nexus between climate impacts and human rights uh, would make, as lawyers or other litigant in general, to present our cost in our cases better in front of the court. And we have also seen proof all over the world. There's an Orhenda case. I'm pretty sure the GLS probably already touched upon it. It's in the Netherlands, and how the Dutch Supreme Court interpreted the European Convention on Human Rights in the light of customary international law and UN climate change regime, and ordered the state to reduce GHG emission by 25% in 2019, right? And then the Neubauer case in 2021, where the German Federal Constitutional Court ordered the German legislature to set clear provision for reduction target in 2031 onward by the end of 2022, right, in Germany. And then in Nepal, for example, in 2018, we found a Supreme Court case in Nepal, the decision in Shrestha, ordering the government to amend its existing laws and introduce new consolidated law to address climate mitigation and adaptation, as this would protect the right to life, the right to food, the right to clean environment, and give effect to the 2015 Paris Agreement. And there are dozens of further cases in national and regional courts, increasingly based on human rights claims. This expert says is projected to grow, right? Um, okay. We have a report from the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, called the Global Climate Litigation Report 2020, which says that between March 2015 and July 2020, the number of climate litigation cases has nearly doubled, um, and filed in 8 countries, and now plus plus, because the South country was not really, apparent, and they were only counting the core climate cases. When we are looking at it based on the Peel and Osofsky concentric circles, the core cases are like cases that directly talk about climate change and climate impacts, while there are other peripheral circles which touched upon climate change, um, but not directly on climate change. Like, for example, a mining case that produces air pollution that would make, people lose their right to a healthy and clean environment, etc., etc. That would be, hundreds and thousands of cases that we can find in Asia Pacific, even in worldwide, I think. So, who would be like more prepared in terms of, handling these cases, right? If a country has their environmental courts or environmental tribunals, these environmental courts and tribunals would be better equipped to handle this phenomenon. I'm sure Justice Brian Preston would touch upon this because he's um, like the person when we're talking about environmental courts and tribunals. He is the Chief Justice of the Australian NSW, Land and Environmental Court. Uh, and these courts, these environmental courts or tribunals, have their mandate, independence, procedure, resources, and court support, and they should be more ready to handle the surge of environmental cases, right? But there are countries without environmental courts or environmental tribunal. So what do they do? So what they currently do is they either uh, most of these cases would go to general court anyway. So what they do is they train their general court judges with environmental law so that they can handle environmental cases. We call this green judges that sits in green benches, right? So we call them green benches courts. So or they're trying to um, use the ADR, alternative dispute resolution method, when we are talking about environmental cases. Okay, so I think I'm going to end my presentation. I don't know if we have time for question and answer, but I would love to hear what you think of this specific human rights, climate justice, and climate issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an enlightening session. And I'm sure the viewers have benefited from the same. Ma'am, with your kind permission, we do have questions from the August audience. So, if you
Mhm.
permit, shall we take up two, three questions?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, ma'am.
We can
So, the
certainly
first,
take a couple of questions, ma'am. Then it would be plenary session 4.
yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So, ma'am, the first question is, can you please tell us as to how judiciary can be more instrumental in bringing about a change in the condition and environment, and in turn protecting the human rights?
Okay. So this is actually very timely and right on the spot because you guys are from India and you have like the most famous environmental court in Asia, if not the world, right? You have NGT. And it is an exemplary environmental court because of its independence and its flexibility in terms of standing rules, right? Even the court can bring their own suomoto motion, which doesn't happen in other parts of the world. And if like the judiciary can give, you know not only being independent and being, uh easily, legal standing, give easy legal standing requirements, but like the most importantly is they can give guarantee of environmental jurisprudence and how these environmental jurisprudence are implemented by the government. So, not just from the judiciary, but also with the support from the government, and guarantee that whatever environmental jurisprudence that's produced by these courts, their political will, and, that this would be implemented by the government. And that is just, giving as much. push at, for the people, not just the litigants, right, but for the people, building their trust, not just for human rights, but also for all the citizens alike. Whatever rights that they're trying to push forward towards these courts, if the government can give all the support, then it will be great, I suppose.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. The another question is, what are the major impacts, according to you, on the human rights
Mhm.
owing to the radical change in the quality of environment?
Oh man! Oh my God! So many, so many. We are already going through it in Indonesia. We've gone through it in Singapore and small island developing countries. I'm pretty sure India is not that good either with your air pollution, right? So, we have decreasing quality of life in terms of all kinds of pollutions that we go through. We have decreasing quality of life in terms of livelihood, right? Uh, our right to work and our right to get stable livelihood. Our right to food is also in danger. All kinds of things. Every time when you look at, the kind of thing that you should have been easy 10 years ago is not that easy anymore. And I'm pretty sure, as time goes on, it will probably get harder for our kids and our grandkids. So there are millions of things, uh, rights to food, right to health, right to live. There are people who lost their lives because the deteriorating impact of climate change, and it's already happening. So um don't fall for a pretext that climate change will be happening in 2030. It's already taken place. There are countries that already lost their territorial land because it's inundated by seawater. So, it's already taking place. It's just a matter of time. If we don't do anything now, then it will be too late.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Uh, Ma'am, one more question.
Okay. Do we have
Yes,
time?
ma'am. Actually,
Right.
we are
Right.
running. I'm so sorry to interrupt because for the plenary session 4, our guest has already entered the broadcast
Okay,
studio. We are so sorry, ma'am. We will not be able to take more questions, although we are having so many things to ask.
okay, okay, ma'am. Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for answering the
Thank
query.
you.
I invite Dr. Payal Mehta, ma'am, to offer the formal vote of thanks, ma'am. Over to you, Payal, ma'am.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much to Linda Yanti Sulistiawati ma'am that she has given so much practical presentation. I must say that it was presented by her that with all possibility of remedies was shown by her by portraying the actual situation that is prevailing not only in one or two country but all over the world across the globe. We all are facing the same thing, and ma'am, your pictorial presentation from the very first slide, it was very apt to connect to the topic that you were addressing.
Thank
And
you.
special thanks for connecting with us on Sunday. We understand that you have given your family time for this precious conference, and it means a lot to us as it would be streaming on YouTube. It is not only for this day or Sunday, for coming days as well. In working days, more students, more academicians, they'll be watching it, and I'm sure that they'll be enlightened and they'll be benefited by the knowledge and by actual picture that you have showcased through your presentation and through your kind sharing that you did. And once again, thank you, ma'am, for understanding our time limit. And we would request you in this vote of thanks that if you can uh, come to us for addressing our students of online on working days at your convenience and at your given time. It would be really great for our students to be benefited by your knowledge, ma'am.
Yes.
Thank you
Thank you
once
very
again.
much. Yeah, you have my email. Just contact me anytime.
Okay, thank you so
Bye.
much once
Have a
again.
good rest of the panels. Bye
Same to you,
bye.
ma'am.
Thank you,
Bye.
ma'am.